Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's webinar, Promoting the Early Childhood Workforce Well-Being Through Reflection and Connection. This is the second webinar in a two-part series titled The Importance of Early Childhood Workforce Well-Being. Our last webinar explored two frameworks from which to look at what teachers need to be well. And this evening, we are going to dig a bit deeper into this by exploring three research-based approaches to promoting early childhood educators' social and emotional well-being. The presenters this evening will describe three different strategies that are currently being used to support the early childhood workforce right here in Nebraska. So before we really get started this evening, I would like to invite you to participate actively in the chat, which I see people are already joining in. So that's a great sign. Thank you so much. Before you come in and add something into the chat, please be sure to select the feature to share with everyone instead of host and panelist. A webinar experience is so much more engaging when you are able to share your ideas and learn from the ideas of other participants. So to get this started, please introduce yourself by sharing your role and what you're interested in learning this evening. Just give you a second to start that. Welcome. It's nice to see all of you. Adding here into the chat to everyone. Thank you so much for doing that. So throughout the webinar, please continue to share your insights, questions, and any connections that you have. We will be keeping track of your questions throughout the webinar. At the end of the presentations, I will facilitate a discussion with the presenters where I will ask them your questions. So that will be a really great part so that we can really bring your questions to the surface for the presenters. This evening, we have three very talented Nebraska early childhood experts, Jamie Bahm, Jolene Johnson, and Hatton Bowers. We are thrilled to have them here this evening. So I am going to stop sharing my screen here so that I can introduce our first presenter of the evening. That is Jamie Bahm. And she is here from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Center on Families, Children, and the Law. So I'm really excited to hear all that she has to share tonight. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you very much, Amy, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. As Amy said, my name is Jamie Bahm, and I am with the Nebraska Center on Reflective Practice with the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And before we get started talking about reflective practice, we're going to start off with just a brief mindful moment to help us kind of get grounded and hopefully help with some focus for tonight. So we're going to take a moment to prepare by doing just a short exercise. I invite you to put away any distractions and really try and focus on just being present for the next few minutes. And you can begin by grounding yourself in your chair, and you can place both feet on the floor. You can let your eyes close, or if that's uncomfortable, have a soft downward gaze. And begin to notice your breathing just as it is. Listen to the sounds of your breath. Notice the sounds around you. And notice how you feel sitting in your seat. Begin to elongate your breath, breathing in, 2, 3, and out, 2, 3. And again, in, 2, 3, and out, 2, 3. Continue to listen to the sound of your breath. Begin to let go of whatever is weighing you down today. Try and let go of whatever is distracting you from being present. Feel your feet on the ground, your legs attached to your feet, and your body grounded in your chair. Let go of the tension built up in your shoulders, the muscles in your neck, and your face, and continue to listen to the sound of your breath. Now begin to bring your breathing back to normal. Begin to notice the sounds around you again. You can tap your toes or your fingers. Gently open your eyes and come back to full awareness. As we move in to talking more about reflective practice, that short breathing exercise that we just took you through, we actually use when we facilitate reflective practice and when we provide the reflective practice training program to people. So you got just a little bit of kind of some of what we focus on through reflective practice. So I am going to focus on some of the work that we're currently doing with through the Nebraska Center on reflective practice. And really, we're going to talk about what reflective practice is and really how it's a way for us to look at our work from the inside out. And so, as I had mentioned, we're with the Nebraska Center on Reflective Practice, which is with the University of Nebraska. But I also want to acknowledge that while the reflective practice training program, its kind of technical home is within the Nebraska Center on Reflective Practice, it is very much an active partnership and collaboration with our partner agencies, including the Nebraska Children and Families Foundation through their Rooted in Relationships initiative, the Nebraska Department of Education, the University of Nebraska Medical Center, Munroe-Meyer Institute, and University of Nebraska Extension. So thinking about what is reflective practice. Reflective practice, as we'll talk about, is generalizable to the helping relationship, and it can be used in a variety of different contexts. So reflective practice can be used amongst systems when systems are working together. Reflective practice can also be used in the context of supervision. So we oftentimes will call that reflective supervision, when supervisors kind of infuse or integrate reflective practice into their supervision of staff. Reflective practice can also be used from peer to peer, as well as in more direct care work in thinking about professional working with the clients that they served. Just a little bit about how I was first introduced to reflective practice. Before I joined with the university, I worked for the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services with their Division of Children and Family Services. And I was a child welfare supervisor for the Lancaster County Family Treatment Drug Court Program. And it was there that I was first introduced to reflective practice, kind of on the receiving end, when myself and the team of caseworkers that I supervised had the opportunity to participate in reflective consultation as a way to kind of help us manage some of the work-related stress and burnout issues that we were going through. So my introduction to reflective practice was very much kind of on that receiving end, and it really was kind of what ignited things for me to really kind of move forward and pursue a path where I could take to others what I found to be very helpful for myself. So why does it matter? Why have this process that we call reflective practice? Well, we all have thoughts, feelings, and experiences that we carry into the work that we do and into our interactions with other people. And this shapes our perceptions and impacts our decision making. And the purpose of reflective practice is to help us seek out and better understand our own internal processes and really examine how that impacts our decision making. And once we are aware of our own internal processes, we tend to make better decisions that are aligned with kind of the mission and values of the organization that we work with, and decisions that better those that we serve. However, when we are unaware of our own internal processes, oftentimes we can make decisions based on assumptions, feelings, and biases, which oftentimes can go unrecognized without this type of practice. So the model for reflective practice that we use through the Nebraska Center on Reflective Practice, through both our reflective consultation services as well as through the Reflective Practice FAN training program, is, we call it for short, the FAN model. It stands for Facilitating Attuned Interactions. And the image on the right side of your screen is actually the FAN image. And it looks like a fan too. So I'm going to go into just a little bit of detail about the model that we use. So in thinking about the learning goals of the FAN, becoming trained to use reflective practice, this is really what the training program is helping you do. It helps us learn to read communication cues, both verbal and nonverbal, from the person or people that we're interacting with. It also helps us to, based on those communication cues, to know when the optimal time is to offer emotional support, ask questions, or to give information. The FAN supports communication by helping us to efficiently address the needs of others and learn to respond flexibly to them. One of the most important learning goals of the FAN is this next one, because the FAN helps us to develop self-awareness strategies to help us manage challenging interactions that we have day to day. And really overall, reflective practice and the FAN model help us to communicate empathically and efficiently in our encounters with other people. So the FAN model is based on developmental principles, and it's generalizable to the helping relationship. So the FAN, while it is a model for reflective practice, what it comes down to is it's really a model to help us communicate with others. And you can think about that communication in a lot of different contexts. You can think about it in terms of supervision and consultation, maybe even coaching. You can also think about using the FAN in the context of interacting with clients and families that we serve. And the FAN is really based on the concept of attunement, right? It's in the name, facilitating attuned interactions. And that's precisely what the FAN is helping us to do, to really create that attunement with people in the moment. And we define attunement very simply as feeling connected and understood. When people feel connected and understood, it creates the space for individuals to learn and to try new ways of relating. And the FAN supports attunement by helping you more efficiently address the needs and concerns of others by matching to the communication cues that they are showing in the moment. And the FAN identifies 5 areas for communication, and those are mindful self-regulation, empathic inquiry, collaborative exploration, capacity building, and integration. So what the fan is helping us do is it's helping us learn to read people's cues, both verbal and nonverbal in the moment, to figure out which of these core processes, or wedges for short, is someone in. Are they in feeling, thinking, doing, or reflecting? And then we, as the attuner, then offer them that corresponding core process. So if someone's in feelings, we offer empathic inquiry. If someone is in thinking, we offer collaborative exploration. And the same is true with doing and capacity building, and reflecting and integration. And then you'll notice on the far left side of this, there's the calming wedge, or the mindful self-regulation. And that is the wedge of the fan that really is about us and being attuned to ourselves, and to being able to identify when we are becoming internally dysregulated, and to use mindful self-regulation strategies in the moment to help us stay balanced and regulated. Because one of the kind of fundamental principles of the fan is that to get calm from other people, we have to be calm ourselves. And so to truly attune with where someone else is at and to meet them where they're at, that requires us to maintain some type of relative kind of internal regulation. And it's really about this concept of conscious attunement. So reading the cues of other people, attuning to their internal state, and really engaging in a way that reflects this understanding. When we can do this, the other person feels more connected and understood, and the interaction flows. And ultimately, we see that with this concept of attunement and making this conscious effort to attune with people, that relationships can strengthen and capacity builds. And so to kind of wrap us up in thinking about the FAN model for reflective practice and some of the work that we're doing through the Nebraska Center on Reflective Practice, just want to kind of briefly mention some of our kind of initial promising program evaluation findings, because we really seek to understand how is reflective practice impacting people with both reflective consultation and FAN training. So in our reflective consultation evaluations, the statements that were rated most highly by the participants were feeling nurtured and supported by their consultant. They felt that they formed a trusting relationship with their reflective practice consultant, and they were really encouraged to talk about emotion. And then to briefly just touch on some of our findings from the Reflective Practice FAN training program, we do see a positive trend. We see that reported burnout measures actually do decrease over time as people go through the Reflective Practice FAN training program in learning to kind of communicate empathically with others while keeping a focus on ourselves, as well as we also see some of the empathy measures go up as well. So we do find that participants are positively impacted by learning to integrate and infuse reflective practice into the work that they do. And with that, I will turn it back to Amy.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was very insightful. Please take a moment, all of you out there, to share your thoughts in the chat and ask any questions you have for Jamie. Just take a second to think about what you just took in and ask any questions that we can share in the Q&A for Jamie later. And while you're doing that, let me introduce myself. I am your host for this evening's webinar. My name is Amy Schmidtke, and I am the Director of Professional Learning at the Buffett Early Childhood Institute. So thrilled to be with you here this evening. And so at this time, please welcome Dr. Holly Hatton Bowers. She's an assistant professor and an early childhood extension specialist at UNL, who's here to share another strategy tonight for really promoting teacher well-being. So welcome, Holly.
Thank you for that introduction, Amy, and thank you, Jamie, for that great overview of the FAN, which I will share later is a great way to integrate these two programs, is something that we're doing right now. So you all can see the screen okay? Okay. So thank you. I'm so grateful to be with you all this evening. I know it's late and some of you are joining us to learn about this great work. And so I feel a lot of gratitude to be able to share our 8-week Cultivating Healthy, Intentional, Mindful Educators program, which really aligns with our overall presentation tonight of identifying effective and meaningful ways to promote self-awareness and feeling connected in one's work, really engaging in that reflection. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of CHIME, and always feel free to reach out to me if you have additional questions. I just wanted to share what led to the creation of CHIME in 2017. Much like Jamie, my work was inspired by my own personal development and learning with mindfulness. And I initially started mindfulness training and bringing it to those who were involved as child social workers, and then started working with family home providers. So before I came to Nebraska in 2016, I had already started practicing mindfulness for about 10 years myself, and then bringing it to other early childhood professionals. So when we started the CHIME program in 2017, it really was based on some of the literature finding that early childhood professionals can be subjects of high levels of stress and burnout, particularly in the United States. There's some findings that about 30% of early childhood teachers have intentions to leave their job. And this turnover, we know, can really affect not only educator well-being, but also the children that these educators are working with and fostering their learning. And so the stress can really be related to high rates of turnover. We also know that, I don't want to say that there's also these, in the previous webinar that you were part of, knowing that well-being is a holistic concept. And one way to support well-being is also doing systemic changes, such as addressing the issue of poor wages and low occupational prestige. There's also research, though, suggesting that educators or early childhood teachers' own psychological resources also contribute to some burnout and emotional exhaustion. And so this really was what was leading to some of our intentions and reasoning for why we wanted to start a mindfulness program. We also are drawing upon the literature that shows the educator depression and perceived stress. So my own perceptions of my stress are associated with seeing children as being more challenging and dysregulated child behavior. Again, these could be associated, right? Some children might be very challenging and have dysregulated behavior, and that can also be kind of a cycle of that increased stress. It also can be associated with preschool expulsion rates. So, and knowing that these early childhood education demands can be particularly salient in the emotional nature of teaching in ECE settings, the early childhood education settings. This can also lead to, with this depression, the stress, having potentially more challenging behavior, perceiving more challenging behavior. It can also lead to feeling more, having less skills to really support your own emotional well-being in that space, which can also affect children's ability to self-regulate. There's also some literature suggesting that the focus on supporting educators' own socio-emotional learning is critically important. So I think we can all agree that at the heart of all learning is having positive relationships and interactions. This is positive interactions with our coworkers and positive interactions with the children. And so part of what we were thinking about in using mindfulness as a way, which CHIME is based on, and you'll learn about in a minute, is that we wanted to use strategies to support the educator or the early childhood teachers of socio-emotional learning. So what does socio-emotional learning look like for educators? We talk a lot about it for children, but what could it look like for educators? Well, not surprisingly, a lot of it is the same for educators as it is for children. And so the literature shows us that children and educators who have consistency and predictability can foster an environment where there's trust and positive relationships. It can support identifying needs and supports. So for the early childhood educator, it can support them in their own stress management and saying when the additional supports are needed. So that can support advocating for oneself. It can also create a space for issues of equity and belonging and efficacy, and that is both individual and collective. Mindfulness can also be, when we think about mindfulness, it's the tendency to be present and aware of current experiences. And it's this attitude and attention that's with an element of curiosity and non-judgmental acceptance. And when we can foster this type of way of being with our feelings and emotions, which Jamie shared why that was so important for well-being, is that it can also support our emotion regulation and our capacity to experience and perceive emotions in a proactive and strategic way. It also might be of interest to know that supporting emotion regulation in this way with mindfulness and reflective practice may also support these adaptive regulation strategies can be associated with lower perceptions of stress, with children's challenging behavior, and also with feeling like you have increased workplace well-being. So we've already discussed these kind of two important dimensions of supporting socio-emotional learning, so mindfulness and reflective practice. And those were kind of the correlational studies. So what I wanted to address was how we can also use mindfulness in programs or even in interventions. And so there's some small evidence to suggest that teachers or educators who participate in mindfulness-based interventions, particularly in primary care settings, can have a benefit in terms of promoting their positive well-being. But there really hasn't been a lot of intervention or programs around supporting the early care educator or the teacher. And so that's really what led to our creation of CHIME. And more is growing, of course. So an important point of CHIME is that it's not intended to cultivate an environment of compliance and passivity. It's really about how can I teach CHIME in a responsive and ethical and responsible way. And our program is really based, I've already shared, on this idea of centrally focusing on the emotion regulation of the educator so that they can have more engaged practices, increase well-being, both mental and occupational, and support children's self-regulation. So what is CHIME? CHIME is an 8-week program where you have 2 hours of an introduction of early care education, followed by 7 sessions that are an hour and a half long. And then each session allows you to reflect in journals and listen to understand by participating with someone else, like another coworker or another educator, so that you can really practice the mindfulness in your communication and your listening. There's also these put into practice activities so that the educator can practice using the socio-emotional learning, mindfulness, and compassion activities with the children. And this is just showing you an example of a young boy who's practicing breathing with a star. And what they're showing some different strategies to do that. So quickly, I'm going to go over the findings because I really want you to be able to have a chance to listen to one of our videos if we have time, because I think that'll be more informative in terms of hearing from those who participated in CHIME. So I'll go quickly through these and you'll be able to look at the slides later. But some of our highlighting findings is that mindfulness significantly increased for those who from before participating to after participating in CHIME. Mental and well-being also significantly increased. Workplace burnout significantly decreased, particularly emotional exhaustion. This is a participant who, again, is sharing in their own words that it helped them feel like they had better ways to support their emotions. And then in a waitlisted comparison group, we also find that there was a significant decrease in those who participated in the CHIME program as compared to those who had not yet participated. So again, those feeling like they have more skills for emotion regulation. And in our recent pandemic, we also find that there's high agreement overall that the activities are liked, that it was an acceptable professional development experience, and that participating in CHIME supported their emotional well-being.
I'm Stephanie Cutler. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I work at Paddock Road Early Childhood Center with the West Side Early Childhood Centers.
Very good. So Stephanie, you've just completed our CHIME program. And so could you share with us how you think participating in CHIME could be, the CHIME program can be a resource to other early childhood professionals?
Absolutely. As a supervisor, it's just been a nice way for me to reflect and think about where I am and how where my emotions are, and to be able to internalize that and then, react and respond to different things that come up throughout our everyday. It's pretty unpredictable. And so, just being able to share that with the teachers and then go into the classrooms and share these activities with them has just been so much fun to see those kids learn and grow. And and then now they have these extra tools in their back pockets too when their emotions are real. And then just using it personally too, like with my own kids and my own family, and at church in my little disciples like Sunday school classroom. There's just so many different ways that you can use these tools every day. And I think that it's a valuable resource for any early childhood educator, no matter what your role is.
I think this is probably one of the best things that I've ever done. Throughout the 20 years that I've done daycare, this is the far most educational 8-week program I've been in. I think it has helped me 150% make a difference in caring for myself and realizing the person that I am in order to become the person I want to be, in order to have the kids react the way I want them to react when they're happy, when they're sad, and sometimes they're crying, but they can't tell me why. But after we've been in this program, I had one little girl just today go up to another little girl and say, "You just made me really sad. I want to be your friend." So she, instead of secluding herself like she had been doing, she used her words. She stayed relaxed. We relaxed together before she addressed the little girl. She wouldn't have had those tactics to calm herself down if I wouldn't have practiced this stuff the last 8 weeks. So and the relationships that I've built with the other girls that were in this, we're all in the same boat together. Why not support each other and be there for each other? And some of the friendships that I've made in this group have just been amazing. So I think it would be a great connection for any provider. The connections I think are awesome.
So thank you both for joining us on this journey of CHIME. And I look forward to connecting with you again real soon.
Just sharing in their own words what the impact of the program was. So that really the takeaway is that there's promising evidence that CHIME supports learning strategies to support healthy and adaptive emotion regulation and workplace well-being. We still have a lot to learn. We continue to co-create and adapt the program. Our next step for CHIME. We have it translated in Spanish, so we hope to, we're piloting it right now in Denver with some early childhood educators there, with 20 of them. We aim to pilot CHIME in Portuguese in Brazil. We're also going to be piloting some of co-creating and adapting CHIME for early Head Start and Head Start settings with a Head Start University partnership grant. We're also including some practices for families to use. And finally, we're growing our CHIME facilitators, both within the state of Nebraska and nationally, and internationally. So lots of exciting work that we continue to engage in to support CHIME using mindfulness, self-compassion, and socio-emotional learning to support the emotional well-being of early childhood educators. Just really quickly, and I'm really excited because we're going to have Jolene present next on some strategies that you can really use in the moment. I'm also sharing the 0 to 3 toolkit for mindfulness. So if CHIME feels like it's too much for a program, it's 8 weeks. Always start small, I say, and use these practices. It starts with you. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you all.
Thank you, Holly. That was very inspiring. I'm so glad we got the video to work, because hearing the voices of the educators really demonstrated the power of time and the difference it makes for teacher well-being. And I'm so proud and excited that Nebraska is leading the charge in this work. This is really exciting. Please continue to add your thoughts and your questions in the chat. But now we're going to bring in Dr. Jolene Johnson. She's the director and assistant professor at the Munroe-Meyer Institute, Education and Child Development. So welcome, Jolene. So glad to have you here.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Holly and Jamie. A lot of great information already shared today. And just one thing to be grateful for, I talked to my sister in Alaska today, and it was -14 this morning as she was driving her kids to school. So I was very grateful to be living in Nebraska, where it's going to be almost 70 tomorrow. So as Amy said, I'm Dr. Jolene Johnson. I am the Director of Education and Child Development at Munroe-Meyer. And I'm here to talk a little bit about the impact of a focus on mindfulness and executive functioning. The focus of our program is a little bit different than Jamie and Holly, where they work directly with educators. Ours has a bit of a different focus. So when we talk about teacher stress and burnout, and you heard some of this from Holly, but burnout and turnover among early childhood teachers continues to impact the field of education. And I think we see it impacting the field of education overall right now. In fact, there was just an article in the World Herald about teachers leaving because they're stressed, they're burned out, they're worried about the behavior of their students and the trauma of those students and how to handle that. So some of this is we also know that child care professionals have other risk factors for things such as cardiovascular disease and often report experiencing high rates of stress, which can lead to depression under burnout. And not only that, but these issues of stress, burnout, and depression can impact how early childhood caregivers and teachers interact with students. So if you're not feeling good about yourself and you're feeling burned out, you might not be as patient with a child. You might not have those interactions that you would want to have with a child. So when we look at our work, we really are looking at this piece of mindfulness. And why would we look at mindfulness? Well, what we know is that when students practice mindfulness on a regular basis, that we see increases in executive functioning. So things like focus, attention, self-regulation, memory. We also know that they have decreased symptoms of anxiety and stress and decreased depression symptoms. So all of those things help students when they're practicing mindfulness. So our intervention really focused on serving students and teachers across 13 high quality early childhood sites. And all of these sites serve low income households. And we had sites across the nation. So we have sites in Seattle, Miami, Atlanta, Tulsa, some here in Omaha, Lincoln, Winnebago. So across this project, we are serving over 300 teachers and thousands of students. This grant focused on social emotional skills, executive functioning, mindfulness, and then self-care. All of these things kind of come together. And I think Holly and Jamie would agree too. One thing probably isn't sufficient, but if you have a comprehensive package that can kind of go together, that does seem to have a benefit. What we knew was that buy-in engagement from the sites was really high. Early childhood professionals were saying, hey, we see our kids struggling with regulating their behaviors, with emotional outbursts. Can you give us some strategies that could help with that? So really the focus for us was on students, and we developed 8 mindfulness strategies that could be used for infants to pre-K students. And they were adapted. So clearly you would have a little bit of different language with infants and toddlers than you would with pre-K students. So we focused on things like the breathing ball. We did things with yoga, pinwheel breathing, using a CHIME, a fishbowl, different things around mindfulness. So teachers learn mindfulness practices, and they also learn brain games. And brain games were activities that they could do in their classroom throughout the day that focused on different executive function activities. So they called them their powers. So they had a remember power, focus power, stop and think power. And these were scripts and activities that they used with students throughout the day. What was different here is that they were embedded within a social emotional framework. So each site had to select a framework that they were going to use. For most of our sites, I would say 9 out of 13, their selected social emotional framework was conscious discipline. They felt that that was the most relationship based, it was the most intuitive, and it could, we could easily embed these activities within the framework. So what we found though, is that when we measured the results on adults is that we saw some impact. So, and I believe Holly uses the same inventory, the Maslach burnout inventory, which looks at 3 different subscales. So it looks at emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, personal accomplishment. And then we also conducted focus groups with teachers in 3 different springs. So spring of 2019, 2020, and 2021. So I'll share some of the results with you, and then we'll kind of talk through lessons learned. So first off, and this is what's interesting, in 2019 here you can see that 212 teachers, 53% said they scored in the high emotional exhaustion category. And to score in this category, you're saying things like, work pretty much takes everything out of me. I don't have anything left to give when I get home for the day. And you can see here, and this is interesting, in 2020, and this is after we've been in the pandemic for a while, only 51% remained in that high emotional exhaustion range. Interestingly, depersonalization also went down. And this is what you would want to see, because depersonalization is things such as, I treat children as objects, or I don't have emotional relationships with the students in my classroom. And then you can see here, though, high personal accomplishment, that remained high across both years. And this 212, this is teachers who are matched. So it's the same group of teachers who answered in 2019 and 2020. So we were a little surprised by this, that these scores went in the direction we would want them to go in, even during a pandemic. There were 3 things that predicted emotional exhaustion. Teaching position. So lead teachers had the least emotional exhaustion. And if you scored high on the teacher depression inventory here, you were more likely to score high on emotional exhaustion. This organization, this was just how long you were in the organization. So those who were in less time had more emotional exhaustion. And then there was one predictor of depersonalization, and that was teacher depression. So the more symptoms a teacher identified on the teacher depression scale, the more likely they were to have symptoms that were higher on depersonalization. Now, there could be some reasons for this. For example, teachers who are lead teachers are making more money than those who are not in those positions. So that is a possibility there as well. But what we found was, when looking at the focus group themes, is that over and over again, we heard from teachers, I am so glad that we learned these mindfulness and self-regulation strategies prior to COVID, because we are using them now with our students and families. And they said the pandemic allowed the teachers to use these with families and be intentional about them during the pandemic. They also felt that because the entire site had focused on self-care and mindfulness, that was supported by the entire state, and everybody, the site and everybody felt supported in that. And here, just a couple of quotes from teachers who said, I don't think our center would be running this well during COVID. The strategies that we have implemented the last year and the relationships that we have built have made our center so much stronger. And the shutdown has proven that. Teachers have found comfort during the pandemic in one-on-one conversations with parents. And again, here we see that parent connection. The next piece that came out really strongly was this importance of self-care. You can see that top quote there is they're saying, thanks so much for continuing to check on me. And then here, I know it's not just my task to make sure the kids are learning, it's also my task to be fully present with my students, and it provides a foundation for them. It gives me permission to stop in and check in with myself in a way I wouldn't if we did not have the culture. So again, giving teachers that permission to check in and have self-care. So even though we focused on the students for the strategies, we started to see the results with the adults who were implementing them in their classroom. So some of the lessons that we learned in implementing this is that we provided the materials and training on concrete strategies. So when they left the training, they went home with the materials. They went home with all the scripts, the lessons, the materials they could implement the next day. And teachers were saying, if I wouldn't have had that, I don't know that I would have been implementing them, because you don't have time to track down the materials. And so by giving these ready-made kits, basically, they were able to go back into their sites and implement. Because it was site-wide, there was a focus on mindfulness, a focus on social emotional learning. So then you have this common language, you have this common framework that all the teachers are using, and that was very beneficial. And then there you see that school directors were understanding and supporting self-care, saying, yeah, we realize this is an important piece for our staff and students. And then this, I think, really shows the connection. Again, this is from a teacher we asked about how often are you using mindfulness, how often are you using brain games? And here, I'm using the mindfulness cards a lot as a resource for my classrooms to use for kids to slow down, especially during nap time. I find myself pulling those resources a lot. It's a reminder that we have these. I have to remind myself to practice mindfulness because sometimes I'm feeling anxious about situations. And then here you can see I feel more effective and supported to families when I'm taking care of myself so I can help the families better. So again, we did not focus on educators, we focused on students, and yet they're starting to use those strategies to focus on their own mindfulness and well-being. But benefits that we noticed from teachers, and this is what they're reporting, was that the mindfulness strategies work for all ages of students. So they were seeing and reporting benefits for infant through pre-K. They were saying that they could see babies, they would start practicing with the breathing ball. The pre-K students were showing their parents how to do the breathing exercises. They were telling each other if their friend had to go to the calm down corner, how to do the breathing exercises. The sites were able to take the strategies and use them that worked the best for their site and what worked best for whatever social emotional framework they saw fit. They reported seeing growth in students' executive function and social emotional skills. We had a lot of reports of teachers saying they're able to identify feelings more, and when they're upset, they're able to select strategies to calm down. And then that parent engagement had increased because they were interested in learning what their students were doing because the students were coming home and sharing those strategies. The next thing here is you can see that by giving the tools, this is just like I am mindful about my emotions and have tools in my toolbox. So again, creating that toolbox. And then the importance of a site-wide focus. I've had the opportunity to be on a team that we are learning on how to implement this in the classroom. So again, I think as an educator, it's nice not to feel isolated. You can bounce ideas off, you can do things as a team, and you can share with parents. And then if you look here, how it's changed teacher mindsets. This to me was very fascinating. I have seen more teachers tap out and tell someone to take over when they need support. Asking for support is becoming more of a norm. And then here you see another one saying, becoming and being more intentional of taking 2 days off each month to reset. And then this last one, I would have burned out and quit this past year without this resilience project. So here teachers noticing the different mindset and that importance of self-care, even though we did not focus on that. And here you can just see their teacher and parent engagement where they're saying, boy, we've had more parents show up for this type of activity than other activities we've had. And that teachers are really talking more about executive function and the brain games and why their child is doing what they're doing. And finally, I think this is just a good reminder for everybody about, again, this comes from an educator, as to I'm amazed how the brain works. We really need to have more, we really need to have reminders of more about that more often. And so just asking for more information and more updates about the brain, how it works, and how we can implement more about it. So I'm going to leave you with these last helpful hints. I would suggest if you're going to do mindfulness practices that you embed them into your current practices. Mindfulness and executive function does not need to be a standalone separate thing. You should be embedding it into your daily activities and routines. It's helpful to have concrete materials and a rationale when you start. Be intentional about the practices, be intentional about the mindset within your center and building. The site-wide support and implementation is key. And then how are you going to engage your parents in the learning and the practices? All right, thanks so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you so much, Jolene. That was very inspiring. I was seeing some private messages here in the chat and wanting to connect with you and hear more about what your program has to offer. So that's really exciting. It's really good information. I believe Lisa's going to bring on Jamie and Holly now too, so we can all have a little question and answer session, a little conversation. So welcome back to the webinar, both of you. Thank you for being here and everything you've shared tonight. The first question I'm going to ask each of you, and you can kind of take turns with your advice here. What is one thing that leaders should do as a first step to get started with mindfulness and reflection and really engaging in this? What is the first thing they should do to get started?
I would say ask their teachers what they want, because that's where we started, and it's a lot easier to get that buy-in from teachers. At least it was for our sites.
I would also add that I think it's important to, as leadership, understand what these practices mean yourself. So you know, it doesn't have to be an 8-week program, but I think experience reflective practice, experience mindfulness, and then see how you think it could also be something you can support as leadership. I find that the most effective places that support CHIME have leadership that also understands what mindfulness is and what it means for their program.
I'll actually kind of go off on a little bit on what Holly said too. What comes to mind for me is that reflective practice and mindfulness is really, and when you think about embedding it within an organization, it's really meant to be a top-down approach. So, you know, if this is something where there's an expectation that your staff, you know, participate in this as well, recognizing that starting with yourself and starting at the top with leadership is a really, really good first step.
That's great. And I think we talked a little bit about that top down here, starting with teachers and then to children, with Jolene really talking about strategies for children and how that's really connected to what both Holly and Jamie you shared about strategies for teachers. That's great. And that brings up another question that came up about the parallel process and really thinking about the connection and the link between teacher well-being and teachers' practice of mindfulness and reflection and children's social emotional learning, their executive function, all of those pieces. Can you talk a little bit more about that parallel process and what that connection is to impacts on children?
Yeah, I can give it a go. When parallel process was mentioned earlier, it made me want to, I'll give a technical definition and then I'll kind of give it a little bit in my own words. But how I like to define parallel process, not my own definition, but when two or more systems, whether these consist of individuals, groups, or organizations, have significant relationships with one another, they tend to develop similar affects, cognitions, and behaviors, which are defined as parallel process. So that's a very technical definition. When I think about defining parallel process in my own words, what really comes to mind for me, especially with the context of, through the context of reflective practice, is that people cannot give what they do not receive. So if we want kind of our direct line staff to engage with children and engage with families in a way that kind of provides for attunement, acknowledges emotional experiences, kind of meeting people where they're at. From a leadership standpoint, you absolutely have to treat your staff the same way, because people won't have the capacity to hold that space for other people if they don't have that opportunity themselves.
Yeah, very insightful.
I would add, Jamie, that that's in speaking with the educators and the teachers, they need to understand what these practices mean for them. And that's why I think I really like what you said, Jolene, about it. Something that we do with CHIME also, and I think can be important practice, is how can it be infused into the daily work that I'm already doing? It's not another thing to do, but it's actually informing the day-to-day work. And children will experience, I mean, that's what you're hearing, is that one teacher in the video who said, I now share these strategies with a child so that they can learn how to have more healthy, adaptive ways to support their emotional well-being.
I think across all three approaches, you can kind of see that there was parallel processing, even though it wasn't specific, right? And that you can see benefits no matter where we started, of at least starting to embed some of these mindfulness practices.
Very good, very good. Well, we only have a couple more minutes here, or one more minute before we can close out. If you want to drop in the chat, Jolene, Jamie, or Holly, how people can access your program or find more information. There are a number of questions on how can I bring CHIME to my program, or how can I connect with what they're sharing tonight. So if you have any information, please drop that in the chat and share it with us, because we can send it out in our follow-up email and make sure that everyone has that information. Thank you for that. So thank you all for joining us tonight. At the end of the webinar, you will see a link pop up that will take you to a survey. Please complete the survey so we can learn how to continuously improve our webinar and our professional learning offerings. We'd appreciate that. Another thing before we end, I would like to invite you to consider a really exciting opportunity. If you're looking for more ways to get involved in helping to shape the early childhood landscape in Nebraska, the Buffett Early Childhood Institute is recruiting a group of early childhood professionals for the inaugural Nebraska Early Childhood Workforce Leadership Cadre. 25 early childhood professionals from across Nebraska will be invited to participate for a period of 3 years. During that time, cadre members will build their individual and collective capacity as thought leaders and early childhood workforce leaders. And these are teachers in the workforce. Together, cadre members will nurture and refine their ideas for elevating Nebraska's early childhood workforce and implement small pilot projects in the communities where they live. So we're dropping a link in the chat if you would like to learn more about this opportunity. And with that, I just want to thank Jolene and Jamie and Holly for taking time to share your really brilliant work on behalf of teachers and the workforce in Nebraska and beyond, which is so exciting that Nebraska is leading the way in this for even beyond Nebraska. So thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise. And thank you all for being here, all of the participants out there. Thank you for joining. Thank you for adding questions and insights into the chat. We will see you in our next webinar series down the road. So please answer the survey and have a great night.
Thank you.